This is from his essay on the imagination, its function, and its cultures. And he writes, "It is not the things we see the most clearly that influence us the most powerfully. Undefined yet vivid visions of something beyond, something which eye has not seen nor ear heard, have far more influence than any logical sequences whereby the same things may be demonstrated to the intellect." I love that. I love that. 'Cause, I mean, it's so true. It's so true. And it's interesting because I was teaching MacDonald last semester, which was so fun because I haven't really properly got to do that. And I saw my students, most of them, I think all of them probably had not encountered MacDonald before. And they responded to this particular thing in a very nice way. So there was a kind of a real response to the kind of idea of an enchanted world. So one of my students was really amazed because she said, "Oh, he actually writes what he wants to do, and then he does it. Like, it works. Like, you're kind of invited into this story, and it's really uplifting, and it's really nice. It's really lovely to be kind of reading this in this space." And of course I was delighted by this, but I was so struck by that because I didn't give them, I was trying to be as neutral as possible. I wasn't like, "I'll give you extra credit if you like MacDonald." But that's what that was her experience of reading this. And I think, the fact that he was dealing with some of the same issues, of course, in different ways, but some of the same issues that we seem to be dealing with. And then I have students coming in, in their 20s, early 20s or something like that, who are reading this, and they're having a similar experience, it seems, of what MacDonald wanted them to have here, 200 years later. So I think there's still a relevance there and still a need for that kind of, I think, vision.
Yeah. That's really good. I'm reminded, thank you for reading from his essay as well. That reminds me of Chesterton's line that Dr. MacDonald returns to fairyland like someone coming home.
Yes, a citizen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so, as you say, not an escapist. It's actually a revealing of the deeper, the more real, the actual. Underlying this whole phenomenon called being a human.
Yeah. I put up, because we were reading Adela Cathcart with, fairy tales and all, and we were talking about, we talked about escape and truth and fact and all this kind of stuff, and which is really fun. And there's a quotation from The Shadows, one of the stories in Adela Cathcart, where Ralph Rinkelmann, the man who goes to fairyland, talks about how all true art makes you, when you go back to kind of ordinary life, it reveals the wonderful, that's in ordinary life. And I put that quotation up and I just said, "What do you think?" And this one student in particular, she was like, it's just wonderful. He's just so great." And I was like, yes, he is. But it's obviously really resonating with her, this idea of, and not just her, the other students as well, this idea of this kind of transformed perception of the ordinary and reality. And, I think there's something in us that, that is looking for that. So anyway,
that's so good. And I guess I will ask you then on that, how would you counsel today's college students seeking the meaning and purpose? I think the answer is kind of self-revelatory at this point, but maybe articulate it with respect to George MacDonald.
Yeah, I think part of it is space and time. I think that's like kind of on a practical level. I think they, and me, I'm talking to myself as well. Just to kind of listen, like space and time to listen what's going on inside of themselves, but also, if they're a person of faith, what God might be saying. And, that's really hard. I think that's a practice that, you have to do. But I think having that kind of ability to cultivate that kind of internal and external space helps, I think, to then be able to look at things and see them differently, because you've just quieted down all that, kind of all that noise, and you're not just reacting to the next thing. And I think it's related to the idea of attention, which I think is related to the idea of vision and how you look at the world and what you're paying attention to. Because, if you're mindful of, if you're mindful of what you're paying attention to, I really think that shapes so much of who you are. And if you're letting an algorithm dictate what you're giving your attention to, you can do that, or you can kind of take a bit more ownership over who and what you want to be. And so so I think space and time, and there's this, okay, I'm going to read you another quote because I love this one. This is like a soundbite, a MacDonald soundbite from his novel, Wilfred Cumbermead. So his narrator, Wilfred Cumbermead, says, "Certainly work is not always required of a man. There is such a thing as a sacred idleness, the cultivation of which is now fearfully neglected." And I love this because I am a classic overworker. So it's a really great reminder that, sacred idleness. And he goes on after this to kind of offer a full on, this is not an oblique unsaying. This is like a full on critique of contemporary thought. So he says that if people in the 19th century saw Abraham seated in his tent door in the heat of the day, he would be an object for uplifted hands and pointed fingers, and they would call him an indolent Arab. And I think this is such a relevant example for so many reasons, right? We have this critique here of a stereotype about somebody who's different, who's culturally different, who's probably racially different than most of MacDonald's readers. And then rather than going along with that, unhelpful and rather ignorant stereotype, he challenges it and he points out that actually this is where God showed up when it comes to Abraham. Yeah. And I think it's relevant today on a number of levels. We can kind of connect the dots. But this kind of, idea, I love this idea of cultivating a sacred idleness, to kind of, slow down and, set ourselves up well to ask maybe those big questions or to hear something about those big questions about meaning and purpose, about why we're here and so on. So I think it kind of creating that space for ourselves, go sit and listen to the birds for 15 minutes a day or something,
Yeah. That's great.
So I don't know. That to me is because I think that those are the moments speaking personally, I think that's where I've been able to reflect on what I think my meaning and purpose is. And it's like coming back to myself in a way.